In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or in the more accurate NRSV UE translation, when God began to create the heavens and the earth. It's probably the most familiar sentence in all of theology. And it sounds perfectly clear. A being decides to make a universe and then made one, like a carpenter deciding to build a table and then building it. But the God of classical theism is nothing like a carpenter. According to the tradition running through Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas, God is timeless. He does not exist at moments. He does not experience before and after. He doesn't wait. He is immutable. He cannot change in any way. He is simple. He has no parts, not even a distinction between his knowledge and his will. He is pure act, fully realized with no unrealized potential of any sort. Nothing he could become or undergo that he isn't already. And he is necessary. He does not merely happen to exist. He could not have failed to exist, and nothing about him could have been otherwise than it is. Hold those attributes in one hand, and the opening lines of Genesis in the other, and a question forms that I've never seen satisfyingly answered. How does a being like that do anything at all? Not why would he, but how could he? What is creation as an act when the actor cannot move, cannot change, cannot transition from not doing to doing, and has no moment in which to do it? This video is about that question. The believer has a series of defenses, each one deeper than the last, and I intend to give all of them a fair shake, before showing why I think each one doesn't succeed. Why does this classical picture exist at all? If God existed in time, he would have a past that he has lost and a future he has not yet reached, which sits badly with perfection. A perfect being should not be missing most of its own life at any given moment. If God could change, then he could change for the better, in which case he was not perfect before, or for the worse, in which case he will not be perfect after. So a perfect being must be immutable. If God had parts, the parts would be more fundamental than the whole, and you could ask what assembled them, so the ground of everything must be simple. And if God merely happened to be as he is, you could always ask what made him that way rather than some other way, and he would not be the end of the explanation. So the ground of everything must be necessary. Each attribute is the conclusion of an argument. It is a carefully engineered concept. The engineering is precisely the problem. Each attribute taken by itself is defensible. Put them all in one being, and then ask that being to do anything, and the machine seizes up. Start with the objection most critics of the classical God concept reach for. It goes something like this. Before creation there was God all alone. After creation there is God plus a universe. God has gone from being a non-creator to being a creator. That is a change in God. But God cannot change. Contradiction, classical theism refuted. However, the Thomists, by which I mean followers of Thomas Aquinas, have a ready answer. Not every true description of a thing reflects something intrinsic to it. Suppose your nephew grows 10 centimeters over a summer. In June you are taller than him. In September you are shorter than him. Something true of you has changed, yet nothing in you changed at all. You did not shrink. The change happened entirely on your nephew's side of the relation. Philosophers call this a Cambridge change, a change in how a thing can be truly described, without any change in the thing itself. The theist applies this to creation. Creator is a relational description, like taller than. When the universe begins to exist, God comes to stand in a new relation, but the newness is entirely on the universe's side. the Thomist says. The universe begins, God doesn't budge. His intrinsic state is exactly what it eternally was. It's a reply that has satisfied a great many people. It shouldn't have, and the reasons it shouldn't have follow directly from the theist's own definitions. I'll present some problems with the analogies the Thomist's reply leans on, and then the deeper defense the tradition falls back on when those analogies fail. Look closely at why the taller than example works. You can become shorter than your nephew only because you are the kind of thing that can have things become true of it. Two hidden conditions are doing all the work. The first is that you as a human persist through time. There is a June at which taller than my nephew is true of you, and a September at which it is false. Even a Cambridge change is indexed to times. The subject must exist at both moments for different descriptions to apply at each. Strip out the June and the September, the time, and there is nothing left for the words was and is now to attach to. The second is that you as a human carry what the scholastics themselves would call passive potential, the capacity to come to stand in new relations, even ones you did nothing to bring about. The relation settles on you like a shadow, but a shadow can only fall on something that has the capacity or potential to have shadow fall on it. Now apply the attributes theists ascribe to God. Pure act means no potential of any kind, and the tradition is explicit that this includes the passive sort. There is nothing God can undergo, receive, or have happen to him. Timelessness means there is no moment or state at which non-creator is true of him, and no later moment or state at which creator is. So both conditions that made the analogy intelligible have been deleted by the very doctrine the analogy was built to defend. The example borrows a temporal potency-laden subject from ordinary life, gets our nod, and then quietly substitutes a being defined as the opposite of both. That's not an analogy, that's a bait and switch. The medievals had a second favourite analogy, and it fails even more instructively. A pillar, they said, can be to the right of a walker and then to the left of him, without the pillar changing at all. All the motion is in the walker. Just so, God can come to be creator of the universe without any change in God. All the newness is in the creature. But notice the immediate disanalogy. The pillar does not make the walker walk. The walker moves himself, on his own steam, for his own reasons, and the pillar's relational descriptions change as a pure byproduct of someone else's activity. The pillar is a passive bystander to the relation it acquires. Is that the picture of creation? It cannot be. The walker in the creation case is the universe, and the universe is not supposed to stroll into existence on its own steam while God stands by like municipal architecture. The entire content of the doctrine is that God brings the walker about. The creature side of the relation, the only side where anything is allowed to happen, exists at all only because God does something. So the analogy fails. If God is genuinely like the pillar, passive with respect to the relation, then the universe must account for its own arrival, and God created nothing. If God is instead the cause of the walker and the walking, then he is nothing like the pillar, and the analogy was never about creation in the first place. You can have the pillar, or you can have the creator. You cannot have both, because the whole question under discussion is what God's doing consists in, and the analogy answers it by deleting the doing. Both analogies run the same strategy: move all the activity to the creature side. And the strategy works in the cases it was borrowed from, because in those cases both things are already there, going about their business independently. The man and his nephew both exist and grow. The pillar and the walker both exist, and one of them walks. Creation is not like that. It is the one relation in which one side is said to owe its entire existence to the other. A defense built on relations between two things that already exist has quietly changed the subject. However, those problems deal with the analogies. They do not deal with the position behind them. A Thomist can drop the nephew and the pillar illustrations and still hold everything he held before, because the analogies were never the argument. The argument is Aquinas's, and it needs two pieces of Aristotle. The first is the accident. A stone is a substance, a thing. Its weight, its color, its temperature are its accidents. An accident is a feature a substance has but could have lacked while remaining the substance it is. The stone would still be the stone if it were warmer or wetter or lying somewhere else. Two things are true of every accident. It was always an accident of something and doesn't float free. My height is not out in the world somewhere, it is in me. And it is contingent, which means it could have been otherwise. I could have been shorter. Necessary is the opposite. What could not have been otherwise? The second piece of Aristotle is that relations are accidents. Taller than Bob is an accident of me. It is in me the way my height is in me, and Bob has the matching accident. He is shorter than me, and that is a fact about him, in him. Both of us are carrying something. But it needn't run both ways, and this is Aquinas' move. When a relational sentence is true, you can ask, which of the two things is carrying the accident? And sometimes the answer is only one of them. For example, you pick up a stone and study it, and now you know it. Two sentences are now true. You know the stone is known by you. First, look at yourself. You have new knowledge you did not have 5 minutes prior. That is a new accident, in you, and it is entirely real. Now look at the stone. It isn't warmer, it isn't marked. If you had never walked past it, it would be the exact same stone. The stone is known by you is true, and there is no accident in the stone corresponding to it. The relation is real at one end. At the other end, it is nothing at all. That is the possibility Aquinas needs. His claim about God is that God is always at the stone's end of every relation he stands in, without exception. God has no accidents, and Aquinas has two reasons. Accidents are contingent, and nothing in God is contingent. He is necessary, and not only in his existence. Nothing about him could have been otherwise than it is. And an accident would also be a component. God plus his power. God plus his goodness. But God is simple, and a simple being has no components. His power is not a part of him. His goodness is not a part of him. They are him. Or it is him. Now, bring back the second piece of Aristotle. Relations are accidents. But God has no accidents, so God has no real relations, including to the universe. The universe depends on God totally, and that dependence is a real accident of the universe, present in every particle of it. God is not related to the universe at all, in just the way that being known was no accident in the stone. But God is doing something, right? So where is the action? A stone lies there doing nothing. God isn't like that. He's holding the universe in existence at this moment, and if he stopped, it'd be gone. Surely that is an accident in him. Aquinas answers with Aristotle again. The action is in the thing acted on. Put a pot of water on a fire. The fire heats the water. Now ask where the heating is. It's in the water. The water is what gets hotter. The fire doesn't get hotter. It was hot before, it's hot after, and its heat is not the heating. The heating is the change in the pot of water. Creation works that way, says Aquinas. God causes the universe, and the causing takes place in the universe as the universe is being caused. Nothing takes place in God. He acquires no accident by making a universe, any more than the fire acquires one by warming a pot of water. Take relations to be accidents, forbid God any accidents, and this is where you end up. That settles where the causing happens. In the pot of water, not in the fire. It still doesn't settle what kind of causing it is. And the fire has a second feature, one that Aquinas does not want to carry over to God. Ask why the fire heats the water instead of freezing it. Because the fire is hot. Heat is what fire is, part of its very nature or essence. And notice that the fire doesn't decide anything. It does not survey the options, warm water, cold water, and then settle on one. Given a hot fire and a full pot of water, the water warms. There was never an available outcome in which that fire left that pot cold. The heat is not something the fire chose. It is what follows from what fire is. Now put God where the fire stands, which is where Aquinas' own analogy puts him. The universe comes out of God the way the heat comes out of the fire. It follows from what he is, and what he is could not have been otherwise. He is necessary all the way down in every respect. There is no version of God from which a different universe follows, and no version from which none follows, because there is no other version of God at all. So this universe is what comes out of what God is. Nothing was surveyed, nothing was settled, nothing was decided. The same thing seen from the universe's end. The universe is supposed to be contingent. It exists, but it might not have. That's the whole reason believers think it needs a maker. But a necessary being, with no contingency anywhere in him, produces this universe as a matter of what he is. And what comes necessarily out of a necessary being is not contingent. It had to be. It is necessary. Aquinas will say that this is exactly the disanalogy, and that this is the point at which the fire stops being a good picture. The fire heats by its nature, and God creates by his will. He does not have to create, he chooses to. Very well, but look at what the will is in this God. It is not something he has. Under simplicity, it is not a component, not a faculty, not a part of him that could have been set one way or another. It is identical with his essence, and his essence is necessary and could not have been otherwise. A will that could not have been otherwise didn't choose anything. It is one more thing that is simply what God is, and out of which the universe simply follows. Keep that in mind, as we'll meet it again shortly wearing Spinoza's hat. So, the relational defences fail in my opinion. But perhaps the theist can defend the act itself. To assess that, look first at what an act is. Take any action you like and examine its anatomy. A carpenter builds a table. Before the act, there is a state in which the table doesn't exist and the construction hasn't yet begun. Then there is a decision, distinct from the state before it, a settling among alternatives where one option becomes the chosen one and the others become the rejected ones. Then there is the doing, which unfolds, a process with stages, in which something that was not yet the case becomes the case. And then there is the completion, after which the act is over and its result remains. Every element of that anatomy is temporal. The decision is a transition. Before it the matter was open, after it the matter is settled. Strip out all before and after, and what is left? Not a faster act, not a more elegant act. No act. You have removed the very structure that makes something a doing. Think of a single photograph of a man in midair above a swimming pool. We say it's a photo of a man diving, but strictly that is false. The diving is not in the photograph. Diving exists only across time, in the relation between moments. One frozen frame contains a man suspended, nothing more. The motion is something we supply from the outside, because we know what came before the frame and after it. A timeless God is one frame. There is no before the frame and no after it. The frame is all there is. So when the theist says God decides and acts and creates, I want to know what those words refer to inside a single changeless frame. A decision with no before, in which nothing was ever unsettled, a doing with no during. At some point, you have to ask whether timeless act is a description of anything, or whether it's a phrase like colourless decision, grammatically valid, but semantically incoherent. A defender of classical theism may object that the diving photograph was never a fair picture of eternity. A photograph holds one moment and no others. God's changeless state, he says, holds all of them, the whole of time together, with nothing lost and nothing still to come. The tradition has a name for it, the eternal now. The idea goes back to the Roman philosopher Boethius. Eternity is the whole of unending life possessed completely all at once. Not endless duration, one moment after another forever. That would just be a very long time. Eternity is having all of it together, with nothing slipping into the past and nothing still waiting in the future. On this picture, God doesn't foresee anything. He sees. Boethius's image is a watchman on a high hill. The travellers on the road below experience the road bend by bend, but the watchman takes in the whole road at a glance, including the parts the travellers have not yet reached. Here's another way to picture it. Take a sheet of semi-translucent paper and draw a scene on it. Take a second sheet, draw the next scene, and lay it over the first, then a third. Put a lamp behind the stack. You see all three scenes at once, one composite image. Now extend it. Let every moment of cosmic history be one screen, from the first hydrogen atoms to the heat death at the end. Stack them all and light them from behind. God's view is the whole stack in one look. He doesn't watch the screens in sequence, the way we live them. For him, there is no sequence, there is the lit stack, complete, eternally. As a picture of divine knowledge, it's the tradition's standard answer to how foreknowledge and free will fit together, since strictly there is no fore, no before in God's knowledge. But we're not asking about knowledge right now. We're asking about action. Find the decision to create in that image. Take your time. I couldn't. The stack of screens is eternally present to God. There is no version of the scene in which God exists and the screens do not. No juncture at which the stack is absent and then, by his choice, appears. The stack doesn't show up. It is simply eternally there, as eternally as the gaze that takes it in. The moment of creation exists inside the stack, on the first screen. It doesn't exist for God, who never faced a state of affairs without it. Aquinas himself conceded that philosophy cannot prove the universe had a beginning. An eternally created universe, he argued, is perfectly possible. The universe could depend on God forever, without ever having begun. We know the universe began, said Aquinas, only because Genesis says so. Dependence, for the classical tradition, was never about getting started. it is an eternal relation. Okay, but then say what has happened to the gift. The theology insists creation is gratuitous. God did not need to create. He could have refrained. Yet, in this picture, God has never, in any sense, been without the universe. A gift that was always already given, that could never have been withheld, that is as eternal as the giver, is not a gift. It's an attribute. The objection I've just laid out is old, and philosophers have answered it. So let me give the strongest reply I'm aware of. It comes from the philosophers Eleanor Stump, Norman Kretzmann, and Brian Leftow, and it says, "You are confusing the essence of action with the human packaging of action. What makes something an act," they argue, "is not temporal unfolding. It's the conjunction of three things: an agent, an intentional will directed at an outcome, and the outcome depending on that will. Succession is just how embodied agents in time happen to implement this. A timeless God can satisfy the real definition eternally. He eternally wills that the universe exist, and the universe exists in a dependence on that willing. No transition is needed, because the willing never began. It simply eternally is. Imagine, they suggest, a light source that has shone from all eternity, eternally casting its illumination. The light never started to shine, yet the illumination genuinely depends on it. Dependence without sequence. I want to resist the cheap response to this, which is to repeat, but acting takes time. The theist has offered a revised definition of action: succession removed, dependence retained, and our concept of action was built from human cases. Perhaps it has accidental features we should be willing to shed when thinking about a very different kind of being. So instead of insisting on the old definition, look closely at what survives in the new one. Two things were quietly lost in the revised definition, and they happen to be the two things the doctrine cannot live without. First, it loses the choosing. Look at the eternal light again, and look for the choosing in it. The light has shone from all eternity. It never began, and there was never a state of the light in which it was not shining. Nothing about it was ever open, because there was never a time at which it was anything other than exactly what it is. All the redefinition of action has given us is a source and a dependence, running eternally in one direction. And dependence is not deciding. The theist will say, I have simply forgotten that God has a will and a lamp doesn't, and that the will is where the choosing lives. But we've already seen what the will is in this God, back with the fire, identical with his essence. And his essence is necessary. So a will that could not have been otherwise never faced an alternative. Put the will into the eternal light, and you get an eternally shining lamp that also eternally and unchangeably wants to shine. You don't get a lamp that might have stayed dark. Defenders will claim the will is eternal and contingent. It timelessly is, but it might not have been. Say that slowly, though, and listen to it. A necessary being, whose essence is identical with its will, has the will it has contingently. In virtue of what? Nothing outside God can ground the contingency, since nothing outside God exists at the relevant explanatory level. And nothing inside God can ground it either, since inside God there are no parts. And a necessary being with a contingent feature is not a simple being at all. It is a being with something in it that could have been otherwise, which is the exact thing simplicity was built to forbid. The contingency is asserted because the doctrine requires it, not because the picture contains it. So redefinition has brought dependence and lost the chooser. Which brings us to the name that has been waiting since the fire. A being from whose eternal, unchosen nature a universe eternally flows is the God of the Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza, from whom the universe follows the way heat follows from fire, by nature and not by choice. The fire doesn't decide to be hot. Classical theists have spent centuries explaining why they are not Spinozists. I am suggesting that timelessness plus simplicity plus immutability plus no real relation is a machine for manufacturing Spinozism, and the only thing preventing the conclusion is the refusal to draw it. A defender will say I have just made a logic mistake, and that my objection has a name. It is the modal collapse argument. The reply, owed most clearly to the philosopher Christopher Tomaszewski, is that I've slid from a true sentence to a false one by being careless about words. Here is the same slide with something familiar. Take the sentence, the winner had to score more than the loser. In one sense, that is just true by definition. Whoever won scored more. But it does not follow that some particular person, say the runner who happened to win, had to win. She could have lost. The winner does not name a fixed person. It names whoever it turns out to be, and that can change from one scenario to the next. So the word necessarily attaches to the role, not to the person who fills it. Tomaszewski says the modal collapse argument trades on exactly this confusion. And to follow his reply, we need the term philosophers use for a complete way things could have gone: a possible world. A possible world encompasses everything, God as well as any universe he makes. So there is a possible world in which God creates this universe, another in which he creates a different one, and another in which he creates nothing at all. Now to continue Tomaszewski's reply. Yes, God exists necessarily, which is to say that he exists in every possible world. And yes, on simplicity, God is identical with his act. But his act works like the winner. It names whatever God in fact does, and what God in fact does varies from world to world. In this one, he makes this universe, in another a different one, in another none. In each world, he is identical with his act, and it is not the same act in each. The necessity belongs to God's existing, not to the particular universe that comes out the other end. So the defender concludes, simplicity and free creation sit together fine, and the Spinoza charge was made in error. This objection does sink the crudest version of the argument, the one that just chains together God is his act, God is necessary, therefore the act is necessary. But it doesn't get the classical God off the hook, for a reason worked out by the philosopher Joe Schmid, among others. Grant Tomaszewski the whole point. Grant that God's one unchanging act could have produced a different universe, or none, without God being any different in himself. Now ask the question the repair leaves sitting there. What makes it this universe rather than another? On the classical picture, there is nothing left to answer with. God doesn't deliberate, because deliberating is a process, one thought after another, and he's timeless. He doesn't weigh reasons, because weighing reasons means having distinct considerations, parts, and he's simple. And the only place left to look, God's own intrinsic nature, has just been closed off by Tomaszewski himself. His concession is that God is exactly the same in every possible world. The God of the world where this universe exists is intrinsically indistinguishable from the God of the world where some other universe exists or none. He has to be, because the difference in him would be one more thing in him alongside his essence, and simplicity forbids that. So the possible worlds differ entirely on the created side, and not at all on God's side, which leaves nothing to explain why we are in this universe. The choice has no explanation at all, not inside God and not outside him. The escape from necessity is bought at the price of pure arbitrariness. A being who is supposed to be reason itself produces one universe out of infinitely many for no reason whatsoever. The universes might have been otherwise has to come from somewhere. Tomaszewski has moved it out of God, and God was the only place it could have lived. So the problem comes back one level down, and it's now worse. Either what God produces is fixed by what he necessarily is, and we're back with Spinoza, the universe following from the divine nature by necessity, or it is fixed by nothing at all, in which case creation is not a choice, but a twitch, a universe selected with no reason behind the selection. Free was supposed to mean neither force nor random. The classical gods creating has to be one or the other. Tomaszewski rescues the logic and loses the chooser. What survives is not a god who decided, but a choice between necessity and randomness with nothing standing in between. We have only traded "he could not help making it" for the "he made it for no reason and couldn't say why." That is not the freedom the gift was supposed to express. That was the first loss. Here is the second. Stump, Kretzmann, and Leftow defined an act as an agent, a will aimed at an outcome, and the outcome depending on that will. Succession was dropped as a merely human accident. Dependence was kept. So everything now rests on dependence. And the question is, what dependence amounts to? In every case of dependence, we understand there is a means. The table depends on the carpenter, and the means is his hands, his saw, his hours of work. The light in this room depends on the bulb, and the means is photons crossing the space. Ask by what means, and there is an answer. Now ask it about God. Suppose a believer tells me that God healed a woman of a tumor. I'm not asking whether it happened, I'm asking what the claim says. On the woman's side, it is clear enough. The cells changed, certain proteins folded differently, certain DNA stopped replicating on a Tuesday, in her body, in time. On God's side, what happened? He didn't respond, because responding is reacting, and reacting comes after something. He didn't intervene, because intervening means entering a sequence, and he is in no sequences. The only answer left is that God eternally and changelessly wills that the tumor regress on that Tuesday, and on that Tuesday it does. So by what means? Not photons or forces, because God is not physical. Not a process, because processes take time and he has none. Not a chain of causes, because the links of a chain come one after another. And nothing runs from God to the tumor either, because on Aquinas' own account, the relation is real only at the tumor's end. Its dependence on God is a fact about it, and there is no matching fact about God. But a means is how a cause produces an effect. So it would have to run from him, from God, to it, the tumor, but that direction is empty. The answer is not that we do not know the means. It is that the doctrine leaves no room for one. There is no medium there, no process, no mechanism, and on these definitions there couldn't be. That's a strange place for the theist to have ended up. Succession was dropped because it was supposed to be the inessential part, the human packaging around the real thing. The real thing was dependence, and dependence turns out to have been stripped of everything that ever made it mean anything. I struggle to see what content remains in the word act once every feature of acting has been filed off. We seem to be left with a label preserved for devotional reasons, attached to nothing. Either creation is a genuine act or it isn't. If it's not a genuine act, if it's an eternal, tenseless, one-sided relation of dependence, then immutability is safe but freedom is dead. The universe follows from God by necessity, and creator turns out to mean that from which things necessarily flow. This God did not choose you, did not choose anything, is not really related to you, and could not have done otherwise about a single particle. He is not the personal free gift-giving God of the religions. He is a metaphysical fountain. If it is a genuine act, then it has the structure acts have. A real alternative that was foreclosed. A willing that settled something previously unsettled. A doing on which the outcome depends in some stateable way. That structure requires time, potency, real relations, and the classical God is defined as lacking all three. To rescue the act, you must give God time and change, and classical theism is gone. There is no third road. Every defense in this video has been an attempt to find one, and each one, followed carefully, has walked back onto one of those two. I want to be clear about what I've not shown. I've not shown that God doesn't exist. I've shown that one very specific God, the God most carefully defined by the tradition's own best minds, cannot do the one thing the tradition's own story requires of him in its opening line. And notice how the failure happened. Not one of these arguments came from outside. The Cambridge change failed because of pure act and timelessness. The pillar failed because creation is not a relation between two things that are already there. Aquinas' own doctrine of relations left the creating with nothing on the divine side to point at. His own fire made the universe follow from God the way heat follows from a flame. The eternal light lost the chooser, and when Tomaszewski rescued the logic, the arbitrariness that replaced the necessity was worse still. Every single one of these was the believer's own machinery, running to its own conclusion. Some Christian philosophers see all this, agree with most of the problems, and take the obvious way out. They drop timelessness altogether and put God in time. William Lane Craig is the best known of them. God on this view is timeless without creation and temporal ever since creation. And it buys them a great deal. A God who really decides, really acts, really responds, because now there is a before and an after for those things to happen in. But the bill comes in three parts. First, going from timeless to temporal is itself a change, and a change needs a before and an after. So entering time seems to require time already. Second, the decision to create still has nowhere to sit. Craig's answer is that the intention is eternal, and the act is simultaneous with the first moment of time. But an eternal intention was never formed and never faced an open alternative, which is the same eternal will the classical picture already choked on. And the act at the very first moment is the execution, not the choosing. The creating gets a date, the deciding still doesn't. And third, a God who enters time learns what it is like to be in time, which means creating made him larger than he was, and the being completed by creating was not complete without it. But that's a whole video of its own for a later date.